Well, thank you so much for inviting me to this interview, but also for IPSS inviting me to this forum, and beyond that for selecting the topic, a very hot topic, current topic, on migration, which in my opinion will be an issue which we need to engage with in the future, as migration will be still an important and challenging issue for African Union, RECs, regional economic communities, and member states in Africa. So the issue was migration, and we were able to explore at least some aspects of migration in Africa, the opportunities and the challenges related to migration, the policy responses, and related issues. Well, I think it's from both sides. You can see migration as a cause, a trigger or accelerator of human insecurity, or it can be also used as a promoter of human security by allowing people to be mobile, seek opportunity, more opportunity, search livelihood, and also seek knowledge, technology, and associated tourism, employment, and so on. So it can be a cause and a consequence of human security or human insecurity, if you wish. The fact that human security defined as provision of all protection to individual and the population in a country, where you have direct threats to physical survival through conflicts, war, or other kinds of threats or risks are avoided, and also indirect threats to human survival and livelihood are also protected. So historically, migration has been part of ensuring livelihood, protection, survival, and so on in human being. Now it will increasingly become an important instrument for individuals to make a decision. And as we have been discussing in this seminar, one can see that migration will increasingly be a topic that will challenge member states and intergovernmental authorities. Well, I think the first thing is there is a lot of misunderstanding on migration. And migration is being seen fundamentally as a problem. So the general public perception and understanding of migration is that migration is a threat, that migrants are a threat to security of a nation, a population, and even to livelihood of local citizens and so on. So you have that aspect where migration is seen as a problem. However, everybody also understands that migration has been part of human life, human being, history of human being, that is an important coping mechanism at the traditional level through spontaneous migration of pastoralists who cross even international border without any reference to state authority, or modern migration which involves countries of origin, countries of transit, and countries of destination, far distance places, which is facilitated by technology, transport, ICT, and so on and so on. So for now, we member states, or even at public level, you have misunderstanding, fundamental misunderstandings about migration, looking at the threat, a problem, and beyond that trying to address it through legal measures instead of addressing it through a policy approach, long-term, strategic approach by getting the basics correct on the ground. And by this, what I mean is basically to consider the reasons, the cause of migration, and which causes should be tackled, which form of migration should be tackled, and which cause of migration should be encouraged, like for mobility and so on. So we have also highlighted in the discussion that migration can take two forms, displacement and mobility. While we encourage mobility, which is within legal framework, we have to reduce displacement, which is a form or a result of consequence of human insecurity. So generally speaking, there is a misunderstanding on the nature pattern of migration in the countries within African Union. And beyond that, we are trying to address it from a short-term legalistic approach, which should have been more, the response should have been more of strategic, policy-oriented, long-term, looking at the benefits of migration, what are they, and identifying them, and identifying also institutions and collaborative frameworks that help augment or enhance, harness the benefits, while also tackling the negative aspects of migration which come as form of displacement or illegal mobility. This is the second part, which we need also institutions, normative frameworks and collaborative frameworks to address that. Well, I think for now, what we see in South Africa, what we have seen in South Africa, will not be the end. We will have other cases, similar cases elsewhere in Africa. I suspect South Sudan and others will have to deal with this flux of migrants, as we increasingly have countries which are countries of destination because they attract, they pull individuals to their country, their jurisdiction. The preparation is lacking behind. So we need an increasing capability to be built by member states to distinctively distinguish between bad mobility and good mobility, and also give protection to people who are displaced because they are displaced out of their habitual residence, but also forced to flee due to conflicts or disasters. They need a separate protection, and we are still at the primitive, if you wish, early stage of developing these capabilities in Africa due to lack of knowledge and also exactly the decisions that member states have to make. So I mean, the first issue in terms of AU being a policy tiger of policy making and so on has to be stopped. Since 2008 I have been calling for a moratorium on ending norm setting, policy formulation, and moving every resource to policy implementation. And for that we need to have a creative way of approach, a creative way of implementing. One is to have national consultative conferences in member states on specific topic, including migration, for example, to pick countries of origin which are with big number of countries of origin of migrants, or countries of destination with big number receiving, or countries of destination. Every year you pick few countries, and the AU Commission, the department, the program going to these member states and bringing these drivers or those stakeholders and partners and the drivers together to deliberate at national level. Where are we in terms of implementing these policies that the AU has adopted and each member states have adopted? And mind you, the AU Commission, the AU Assembly decisions are binding by law. So there should not be confusion that because they are policies, they are not binding. They are binding. Each individual provision may not be binding, but generally the decision is binding. And we have to take it to member states. That's the first step. The second is to get it also to first start with introspection. And this has been highlighted also, to stop blaming outsiders, to blame oneself first, to have introspection internally, why this is happening in each country in terms of violations of human rights, or in terms of not having effective socio-economic response capability. So that is another aspect. The third one is to get the fundamentals correct, like I said earlier. The first one is to look at migration holistically, comprehensively, to identify the benefits and the negative impacts and address them in the long-term perspective by providing normative framework at national level, institutional framework at national level, and collaborative framework at national level among institutions and countries. And the cooperation is not yet there, because the main challenge is aggregating preferences between member states, which will be a challenge because they have different, sometimes incompatible, contradictory end states among themselves. That is an important aspect, in my opinion. So if you wish, in terms of implementation, the third important aspect will be to start with soft approach. The first thing is member states have a general understanding of what will be the implications of migration to their economic and political, social, and the other security components. The first thing is to highlight what are the implications for member states. There is lack of knowledge, depth of knowledge on the implications, the cause and consequences of migration. For example, through survey after survey, you will see member states will put number one barrier to migration is security. They are concerned that migrants are threats to security of the country. However, we know that if they are threats to the security, already they must have access somehow, and they are having access to that. The increasing border control, first, will not be effective, but it's not also has never been effective, but it's not going to be possible also, because we have porous borders and so on and so on. So the first thing is to have a soft approach, to identify the major concerns of member states and try to sit down with them and discuss how to avoid these major concerns. And that is a very important approach. If you impose without consulting member states, AU is nothing without the member states. They implement it. AU can stretch its hand to the extent that member states are willing it to stretch its hand. So the third one is the approach to bring policy changes in member states.
And is that happening?
In some respects, because it started late, this process of diffusion of policies and norms, it started late. Now we are seeing. I can mention one process that I am involved, two processes, the AU process with the RECs, where RECs are more willing now to engage with the member states, with the AU and member states, and the second one, IGAD, which has started now on studying, has conducted study already on barriers, identified the barriers, member states have agreed, and there will be a phased approach to free mobility, but at the same time building capabilities on the four areas, on predictive capability, preventive capability, responsive capability, and adaptive capability. And what we are trying to do is to engage member states to address their concern first, and start by having a free mobility regime, which first brings officials without visa within the region, and then next it will expand to investors, because they will be less challenged, because we believe it's lack of knowledge, not lack of will, that is a problem. So the member states are now willing to allow officials to move without visa and investors without visa. And after 6-7 years, they said they will allow academic, university professors, students, and so on to move without visa, and after 10 years for free mobility regime. If it doesn't happen at least in 10 years, if it happens in 50 years, in my opinion, if we have free mobility regime, it's a big success. But the reason why we reached this here is by avoiding imposition on RECs and member states to say, do this one. Rather, we address their main concern and share the concern that they have, but trying to show that these are not tangible concerns that can take us sustainably for a long-term strategic actions. Yes, in another area in relation to this is informal cross-border trade between two countries. Already is happening in IGAD. So you have a minimum amount of $1,000 between Ethiopia and Sudan, where individuals with a value of $1,000 can take items to the other part. Now, these are from cross-border. Cross-border means it's not transnational. It's cross-border nearby people who have ID cards or who are known for the officials, border officials can move. This can be expanded, scaled up, if you wish. The same thing is happening with a bigger amount between Somaliland and Ethiopia, between Kenya and Ethiopia, and also with Djibouti, similarly. In other places, in Great Lakes, the same with higher amount of money cap is happening. So mobility can be encouraged through this kind of approach, and I think this is something that can be scaled up easily. And I think this has two aspects, three aspects: the economic aspect, the trade aspect, the food security or livelihood security aspect, and which has also cross-border governance aspect, which is more a security aspect, because cooperation between the two border officials and authorities will be important. Now more and more bordering area authorities are cooperating with each other than national government at national levels. This is examples that are very small but can be easily expanded, scaled up, because they are low-hanging fruits, as we call them. They can be easily harvested with small political will, with limited knowledge, because the local authorities, the local communities wanted them. They are sustainable. You cannot stop them once they start. It will be hard to stop them. So they are sustainable, they are economically efficient, they are also, in terms of cross-border security governance, cross-border human security governance, cross-border food security, and so on, they can contribute to the livelihood of the population. If you try to stop some of the cross-border economic activity now existing, you will have definitely a problem in the long term on security issue on the border area. Well, I think it's of the same that we have seen before, in my opinion. Again, the partnership between AU and EU can be characterized as full of frustration, lack of delivery, and as a result with full of tension. And the similar situation may happen in the next Malta process. And the reasons has to do with, in my opinion, the reason that we are talking about. The first one is migration is not yet a big priority within member states in Africa, while it is almost number 2 or number 3 in the European Union, next perhaps the Greeks and terrorism and so on. Now the homegrown terrorist attacks especially. So this is a big issue for them. So there is a mismatch. Motivational gap, you can call it, motivational gap from AU to stand up fully, put all its resources until it becomes a priority, a big priority for the African continent. The second, and most importantly, is European Union has to come with more funding, while the African Union has to come with more commitment to implement at national level. And that is, it will be one of the big challenges that we will notice in the Malta process. We can add also another aspect to this. The biggest progress, if there is, will be for African position to be used to reflect on Africa first. Because you cannot respond in Libya about migrants from Ethiopia. It will be short-term. It will be interventionist, not preventionist, not predictivist in many ways, the approach. So we have to move the response first to the resource. Migration is a local act with global implication. And the battlefield is at local level. And how do we change the landscape of migration? The causes, the triggers, and the accelerators of migration, especially displacement, but also bad mobility, and encourage the good mobility for people to look for greener pasture legally is a big issue that has to be tackled at member. So I hope everything else, including Malta, will become subsidiary for what local level action has to be done. So everything, AU has to be subsidiary to local action. International actors has to be subsidiary to local action. The Malta process has to be subsidiary to what AU does, and the AU has to be subsidiary to what REX has to do, and also REX has to be subsidiary to what national, and accordingly to the local level. So in my hope is, and the first drafting has to address these things, that everyone else remains subsidiary and supportive to local actions at the ground. This is another fundamental issue that needs to be considered, and hopefully Malta will consider this one. As they see it, it's not possible to stop from Mediterranean Sea, and it's not possible to stop even in Gulf of Aden, or it's very difficult to stop also illegal migration through the southern route to South Africa. That the solution is in the countries of origin at local level, not in the countries of destination or in the route countries of transit.